So you've been asked to make a wedding speech, or maybe it's a presentation at work. Whichever one it is, you probably clicked on this video because you're absolutely terrified, and you are not alone. Public speaking anxiety, which by the way is called glossophobia, is one of the most common types of anxiety, and surprising the effect it can have on the body. If you're new to my channel, I'm Martin Burridge, a former psychotherapist, and I make videos to help people overcome their anxieties. And with all types of anxiety, the first thing you need to do to conquer it is to understand how anxiety works. But before I explain that, I want to have a quick word about alcohol. Particularly in Britain, many people use alcohol to try to get through a speech. But there are many reasons why this is not a good idea. Firstly, you are more likely to make mistakes, lose your place, or forget your words if you are drunk. Secondly, you may be tempted to add something that you think is hysterical, but others find thoroughly offensive. And if your stomach is already sensitive due to nerves, pouring lots of alcohol into it is just not a good idea. And of course, if your speech is a professional or work speech, alcohol is not an option anyway. The other problem with alcohol is that it's a form of avoidance. And the first thing you need to understand about anxiety is that the more you avoid something, the worse the fear gets. And you have probably either avoided public speaking for most of your life or just never had to do it. And even if you get away with using alcohol this time, there is a good chance you will have to speak in public at some time in the future when using alcohol isn't appropriate. So it's best to get over your fear now. But how do you do that? Well, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that the only way to completely overcome a fear of public speaking is to do lots of it. The part of the brain that generates the fear response is called the amygdala. Just as when you avoid something, it teaches the amygdala that it's dangerous, when you do something a lot, it teaches the amygdala that it's safe. So it doesn't activate the fight or flight response that plays havoc with your heart rate and stomach. The good news is that there are some things you can do to make this scary task more tolerable, and I will share later the secret of how I overcome terrible anxiety when I had to do an important presentation 25 years ago, and it's something I've used many times since. When you have to do public speaking, you will likely get bombarded by negative thoughts and images. What if I knock my drink over? What if I have a panic attack? You may picture yourself forgetting your lines, looking really nervous, or generally making a fool of yourself. Maybe you think everyone will be laughing at you for all the wrong reasons. But wait, you need to hear this. Just like any type of anxiety, these thoughts are driven by misguided beliefs. In cognitive behavioral therapy, the relationship between thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical symptoms is shown in the anxiety cycle. Let's have a look at some of these beliefs. Great speakers are born that way. Not true. No one starts out as a great speaker. Practice and experience is what leads to being a good speaker. Experienced speakers don't feel nervous. Not true. I've spoken in public many times, but I still feel nervous. In fact, I believe it's essential to have a bit of nerves to make sure you don't get complacent or prepare inadequately. You have to be perfect. Not true. It's perfectly acceptable to make a mistake, and chances are your audience knows you are new to public speaking, so they will cut you some slack. You have to memorize your speech word for word. Sure, if you're a politician addressing Parliament, but if you are making a wedding speech or a work presentation, it's okay to consult your notes occasionally. Your audience is interested in your content, not how polished a speaker you are. People can see how nervous you are. Whilst it's true that if your hands are shaky or fidgeting, or your voice is shaky, people might notice, but their perception is often not as bad as your own. I recently delivered a mental health presentation to around 100 people. I had not done public speaking for a few years due to the COVID lockdown, so I felt a lot more nervous than usual. I detected that my voice was a little shaky. Several people approached me afterwards to say how interesting my presentation was. I mentioned that I'd felt surprisingly nervous, but they all said they had not noticed, and I don't think they were just being nice. Often with public speaking anxiety, there is a feeling that everyone is judging you, laughing at you, or wanting you to fail. But I've seen many people deliver very nervous wedding speeches over the years, and the audience actually has a lot of empathy for them. And I've heard people say things like, "I couldn't do it," or "I really feel for you." So remember, the audience is on your side. Also, ask yourself what is the worst thing that can happen. Maybe you spill your drink. Maybe you lose your track and have to pause to read your notes again. Maybe you completely freeze and just can't go through with it. Ask yourself, what is the worst thing about that? I have seen the latter happen with wedding speeches, but nobody has thought badly of the person who froze. In fact, nobody even mentioned it, because everyone understands how nerve-wracking it is if you're not used to public speaking. Let's go back to the CBT anxiety cycle. Your beliefs drive your negative thoughts and they drive your feelings of anxiety, but power in this whole cycle is your behaviours. We have talked about how avoidance behaviours increase fear, but there are other behaviours that fuel anxiety. Seeking reassurance is very common. Asking everyone if they think you're going to be okay. You should of course prepare for a speech, but over-preparing just reinforces the belief that you have to be perfect, and we know that beliefs will drive anxious thoughts and feelings. During the speech, you may not look at your audience at all, just looking down at your notes instead, but try to look up occasionally and focus on different people in your audience. A lot of our communication is non-verbal. When we're nervous, we judge how our audience is feeling by how we are feeling. But if you look at them, you can judge how they are really feeling, and it's probably a lot more positive than you are assuming. You may also be tempted to rush your speech, but rushing, especially if you are also looking down, makes breathing really hard, which will make you feel even more anxious. So take your time. Rushing sends a signal to your amygdala that this is such an awful and dangerous experience that you want it to be over quick. But taking your time sends a reassuring signal to your amygdala, so it will slow down your heart rate and not launch the fight or flight response. So what else can you do? Well, the best way to treat any anxiety is gradual exposure to what you fear. This is not easy with a one-off public speaking event, but there are little things you can do to gain confidence. For example, if you have a lot of meetings, stand up in one. Grab a pen and explain your views or ideas on a whiteboard. If you see a friend on the other side of the road, shout across to them so that passers-by can hear you. Before your speech, do a practice run in front of some close friends or family. Ask them for feedback. Encourage them to be critical. 1, it desensitizes you to criticism, and 2, it may help you improve your speech. Another thing you can do is experiment a bit to test the negative beliefs that you fear. Although not appropriate for a business speech, there is no reason why you can't start a family wedding speech confessing that you are absolutely terrified. Rather than people mocking you, you will likely find that people respond with words or shouts of encouragement. Respond with a big smile. There is a constant communication going on between our body and our amygdala. A big smile sends the message that everything is fine. So all these little tips will help, but I promise to tell you my secret weapon against public speaking anxiety, and that is self-hypnosis. 25 years ago, I used this for a very important sales presentation that I was hugely nervous about. It calmed me right down and led to a very successful presentation. If you want to learn self-hypnosis, I have a series on how to do it, which I will link at the end. Or you can just listen to the specific hypnosis video that I've made for public speaking anxiety. Just listen to it a few times, including the night before a speech, and if you're really struggling on the day of the speech, pop into the toilets, put in your earbuds and let it calm you right down before the speech. I will link this video at the end also. So just go do it and let me know in the comments below how it went. The best cure for public speaking anxiety is public speaking. You will feel brilliant afterwards. It's a very rewarding experience, and though I still get a little nervous, I actually have come to enjoy the adrenaline rush, and I often volunteer to do presentations to large groups. And the more you do it, the less nervous you will feel. So, if you're asked again, which could well happen, you will not need quite so many visits to the toilet.